This video and all of its contents, including any opinions expressed by the narrator, are strictly for entertainment purposes only and is not intended in any way as a substitute for professional services and consultation from a licensed therapist, doctor, attorney, or other licensed professional service provider. Each person must make their own life decisions, and those decisions are theirs. Welcome back to Find Your Alpha. I'm back at you this week with another great story, and you can see the title right on your screen. Guy turns the tables on his cheating fiancée, then ghosts her. And I think you're really going to like this story because this guy handles things just about as well as you possibly could in a situation like this. So let's not waste any time. Let's get right into the story. And he starts out and he said, "This happened to me back in April of 2022. At the time, I had been with my ex-fiancée for over 7 years, and we were scheduled to be married in June. At her request, we were going to have a big wedding, and her parents insisted on paying for everything. Life was sailing along for us right up until the evening of Monday, April 18th. So what happened on that fateful evening? He says it was tax day, and I was already in a bad mood as I ended up owing over $1,100 to the IRS. But little did I know things were about to get a lot worse. That evening I was watching TV waiting for her to return from what I thought was a work function. Earlier that day she had called me to ask if I would be all right with her going out to dinner with several of her co-workers who were visiting from another office. I said sure, no problem, and never gave it a second thought. While she was out that evening, she sent me a few texts, giving me quick updates on what she was doing and asking me silly stuff. We texted back and forth, and she let me know she'd be home at 8:30. She actually didn't make it back until around 9:15, but again, I never gave it a second thought. After coming through the door, she walked directly over and kissed me. Normally we greeted each other with a quick peck, but this kiss was passionate, like she wanted to get something going right there. As she was kissing me, I noticed a couple things. Now listen to this. He says, first, her breath smelled like a combination of alcohol and toothpaste. And second, her skin smelled like she had just taken a shower. I was about to question her about this, but before I could get the words out, she started telling me about her day. She was talking fast and spewing a lot of information which had little relevance to the situation. She also wasn't making any eye contact with me. Again here, I noticed something was off, and I eventually interrupted her and asked if she was drunk. She looked at me surprised and said, "Of course not. I only had 1 glass of wine." This too was odd, as she didn't drink wine. When I questioned her, she said everyone at the table wanted to order a couple bottles of Merlot, so she just went along with it. I'm not sure why, but something deep inside was telling me she wasn't being forthcoming. Alarm bells were going off in my head, and I just had a gut feeling about it. Remember, guys, always trust your gut. Sometimes it's wrong, but the majority of the time you're going to find it's right. I thought about confronting her right there, but I was really tired and I didn't want to get into a big argument at that hour, so I went in to take a shower. I think she sensed I was onto something as she had a worried look on her face as I walked away from her. While showering, I thought through everything, with my mind playing various scenarios of what might have happened. Though I wanted to believe otherwise, my gut kept telling me she did something. When I got out of the shower and finished drying off, she came in and started rubbing my chest and pressing her lower areas against mine. Next, she removed the towel I had wrapped around my waist and placed it on the floor. She then dropped to her knees and proceeded to give me blank. And you know what blank is. Now that may sound great to most guys, but let me tell you something. That is a huge red flag based on what he just described to us. He goes on, he says, I let her proceed even though I knew she was doing this to make up for something. She's one who doesn't like giving it, but loves receiving it. Also, when I blank, and I had to clean things up here because he gets a little descriptive, she normally spits it out, but this time she didn't and had a big smile on her face. So it's very clear what she's doing here, folks. She is love bombing him. She knows she did something terrible and she's just doing this to distract him. That night while sleeping, I had to get up to take a piss, something I normally don't do. When I came back to get in bed, I saw her phone sitting on the nightstand beside her. I decided to take the opportunity to check it while she was sound asleep. To my surprise, all her recent calls and texts had been deleted, except for one text that came in at 1:37 a.m. after she had fallen asleep. It was from someone she had set up in her contacts as Louisville Office. The text read, "Just had a dream about you," with 2 heart emojis, followed by "Can't wait to see you again on Thursday," with 2 heart emojis. He says, "While not a smoking gun, I knew what the message meant, and I was devastated. I took a screenshot of the text and sent it to my phone, then deleted the screenshot and text I sent from her phone and placed it back on the nightstand." Needless to say, I got little sleep the rest of the night and had to do everything I could to prevent myself from waking her up and exploding on her. I wondered how she could do something like this to me after I had treated her so well for so long. It is crazy and it is perplexing, but oftentimes you'll find the better you treat a woman, the more she trashes you. He goes on, he says, "In the morning I acted like nothing was wrong and we both went off to work. On my way, I called my older brother and told him what happened. He could tell I was upset, so we arranged to meet up after work to talk further. When we talked that evening, he told me to lay low and hold off on confronting her until I see what she does next. He said I needed more proof, and if I confronted her now, she'd just deny it and might cancel whatever she had planned for Thursday. We next discussed what I should do on Thursday after she tells me she's going out again. My brother suggested I follow her when she leaves work and said that he'd come with me. He and I continued talking there that night for hours, and I didn't get home until after 10. When I did, I gave her a quick peck and went in to take a shower. After the shower, I got into bed without telling her goodnight. When she realized I had done so, she came into the bedroom and sat on the bed beside me. She asked why I went to bed without saying goodnight. I told her I was really tired and had a headache. She then asked why I stayed out so long. I told her I was just hanging out with my brother and we were catching up on stuff. She had a look of doubt on her face but didn't press me further. I gave her another quick kiss, then turned over to go to sleep. The next day, my brother called me at lunch and said he just got off the phone with her. He said she pressed him for answers about what we were doing last night. He said he had to think on his feet and told her he was asking for my advice on a personal matter. He said she seemed to accept the explanation and then went on to tell him she was concerned because I had been acting weird recently. The OP says, I wonder why. After hearing this, I told my brother I was going to really F with her head tonight. I said I was going to call her in a few hours and tell her I was going out for drinks after work with some coworkers. I told him I was only going to give her vague details, then stay out really late and see how she reacts. He told me that sounded good, but warned me to be careful as this might make her change her plans for Thursday. I told him I wouldn't go overboard, but I wanted to mess with her while I had the chance. And now we're at a point in this story where I want to remind you, if you like what you've heard so far, make sure you hit that like button and leave a comment. That will help get this video seen by people all over the world. Now let's go on with the story. Later that afternoon, I called her and told her I was going out. She asked me a bunch of questions, but I kept things vague. I told her we were just going out for a few drinks, but I didn't know where yet. I told her I'd text her when I got to the bar, but I never did. After work, I headed over to P.F. Chang's at the mall and had dinner. From there, I cut through the mall to get to the sports bar. While walking past Macy's, I decided to pop in and spritz myself with some women's perfume from a tester bottle. I did it to add a little more drama when I got home, but the shit was nasty and made me gag. I ended up not getting home that night until after 11 o'clock. When I did, the lights were all out and she was in bed. I went over and gave her a long kiss, making sure she got a good whiff of the perfume on my shirt. At first, she acted like she was sleeping, but when she smelled the perfume, she perked up and asked where I'd been. I told her I went out to dinner at P.F. Chang's with my coworkers, and then we all hung out at the sports bar for a while. This was all technically true, except no one was with me. She asked why I didn't text her, and I said I got busy and just forgot. She said, and then in a huff rolled over and turned her body away from me. I went back in and took a shower and then slipped into bed beside her. So you can see a lot of this story revolves around the shower. This is like the third shower this guy has taken as he's described this story. After a few minutes, she spooned up to me without saying a word. For some reason, when she did this, I just started laughing and couldn't control it. She looked up at me and asked what was so funny. I told her it was nothing. With that, she again turned her back to me and moved over to her side of the bed. So again, she was probably very huffy there, the way he's describing this, and moved away from him. When she did this, I had to do everything I could to prevent myself from bursting out laughing again. The next morning, things were frosty between us, and I didn't attempt to break the ice. Instead, I gave her a quick kiss as I was leaving and told her I'd see her tonight. She didn't return the kiss or say anything, telegraphing to me she was really pissed. So she's thinking in her mind, hey, this guy cheated on me last night. So watch what she does next. That afternoon, she texted me and stated she was going out again with those same coworkers and that she'd be home when she gets there. Obviously, she was still miffed at me for last night. So now, not only was she cheating on me, she was doing it with an attitude which made me hate her even more. I texted her back saying, okay, have fun. She didn't even bother to text me back or text me for the rest of the day for that matter. While I might seem cavalier about all this now, I was really torn up inside at the time. I couldn't believe the woman I loved and treated so well for 7 years could do this to me. After that, I called my brother and we set our plan in motion. We both knocked off work a little early so we could stake out her office and follow her when she left. He swung by my apartment and drove me over to her office. We parked just down from her car where we could clearly see her vehicle without being noticed. She came out at just after 5, got in her car, and began driving north. My brother tailed her from a distance and we almost lost her at one of the red lights, but thankfully we didn't. She eventually turned into the Hilton Garden Inn and backed into a parking spot. We drove past the Hilton and turned into the lot of the adjacent hotel, which sits on a bluff above the Hilton. From there, we had a clear view of her car and the front doors of the hotel so we could watch her walk in. She sat in her car for a good 20 minutes until a white Toyota Corolla pulled up and parked a few spaces down from her. A big guy got out of the car wearing a polo shirt and dress slacks and started removing items from his back seat. So Chad is now on the scene. She then got out of her car and went over to join him. When she did, he leaned over and they shared a passionate kiss as he continued gathering his belongings. Though we were a distance away, my brother and I were able to snap a number of pictures, including several of them kissing and walking hand in hand. Seeing her do that really broke me and I started yelling and crying. Thankfully, my brother was there to calm me down, as I don't know how I would have handled things had he not been. I probably would have run down the hill and tackled the guy on the asphalt or something, which wouldn't have been smart because he described this guy as a big guy, and I'll tell you what, a cheater like his fiancée, she's not worth it. After we watched them disappear into the lobby, my brother drove me back to my apartment to get some of my stuff. We loaded most of my possessions into my car and put some larger pieces in his pickup. When we had everything loaded, I told him I'd meet him back at his place in a little bit. He asked where I was going, and I told him I was going over to tell her parents about everything. Now this is where I think he did something brilliant. When I got to their place, I knocked on the door. Her father answered and asked why I knocked and just didn't walk in as I normally would do. I told him I had something important to talk to them about and asked if his wife was there. He asked me if something had happened to his daughter. I told him she was fine, but something had happened that I needed to tell them about. He gave me a concerned look, but called out to his wife, and she joined us in the dining room. As soon as we were all seated at the table, I told them everything without holding back. I informed them the wedding wasn't happening and they should plan accordingly. They were in complete shock, and her father asked me to repeat what I just said. I again told them what she had done and then showed them the pictures. They were crushed and in disbelief. I informed them that she was with her lover right now at the Hilton Garden Inn, and they might be able to catch her there if they left now. They were both devastated and profusely apologized to me. I told them it wasn't their fault and that I appreciated their kindness over the years. Her mother was crying and kept saying she couldn't believe it, while her father just shook his head. I thanked them both, gave them a hug, and left. They walked me out to my car and kept saying how sorry they were. After that, I drove over to my brother's place and crashed there. I'll admit that was one really tough night for me. I was filled with a mix of sadness, along with a hefty dose of betrayal and sheer anger. The following day, I called off work and headed off to the state park to take a hike and do some fishing to clear my mind. Sometime around mid morning, I started getting calls and text messages from her, which I didn't answer. In her first voicemail, she was crying and telling me how sorry she was, saying she loved me and only me and wants to be my wife. The OP says, LMFAO. In her next message, she informed me she just resigned from her job and blocked the guy on everything so we can start over. And the OP says, yeah, right. Isn't it amazing how a lot of these cheaters just think, oh, all I got to do is block the guy and cut him off and then apologize to my boyfriend, or in this case, her fiance, and everything's going to be okay. We're going to go back to normal. No, it doesn't work like that. She begged me to call her, saying she would do anything to save our relationship and give me everything if I'd give her another chance. I didn't respond to any of her ridiculous messages, and her phony pleas made me hate her even more. A few hours later, my brother called and told me he had just gotten off the phone with her. He said she was inconsolable, and he could barely make out what she was saying. She told him she was desperate to find me and asked if I was staying with him. He lied and told her I wasn't, informing her he knew where I was, but he couldn't tell her. To make a long story short, she tried constantly to contact me for weeks, but I completely ignored all her attempts, including those by her family. I was done and wanted nothing more to do with any of them. And I think that's really smart. Even though he said he had a good relationship with her parents, you got to remember, those parents, even though they may be empathetic with you, they are eventually going to side with her. So it's best just to cut ties with all of them. She even showed up at my brother's place on 3 different occasions. Thankfully, neither of us were there at the time, but we saw her on his Ring camera. She also showed up at my job a few times, but the receptionist had instructions from me to tell her I wasn't there. So again, he's totally ghosted her. After about 3 months or so of this nonsense, she eventually stopped trying, and I've never seen or spoken to her since, though I have gotten updates about her from a guy who's married to one of her cousins. He and I are in a golf league together and have become buds. He's kept me abreast of everything that's happened in her life since we split. According to him, after I told her parents, they did go to the hotel to confront her. He said they tried calling her, but she wouldn't answer, so they parked and waited for her to come out. From what he told me, she still has PTSD from that confrontation. He said she's still completely ashamed and embarrassed by everything. She recently took a new job and moved an hour away to try to rebuild her life. According to him, the guy she cheated with is single and wanted to get into a relationship with her, but she wanted nothing to do with him after we broke up. How does that make any sense? The OP says she was willing to risk everything to take a few joyrides on his D, but wants nothing to do with him now that she's a free agent? That's crazy, he says. And it is crazy when you think about it, but how many of these women do this in these stories? You know, they're willing to cheat on their boyfriend or their husband, or in this case, the fiancé, but once the fiancé acts like a man and cuts them off, now they don't want anything to do with their affair partner and they want their fiancé or their husband or their boyfriend. It's crazy, and guess what, guys? You'll never understand it because there's no rational explanation for it. He told me she still goes around telling people that one day we will get back together, but that's never going to happen. She's a very attractive woman, so I'm sure at some point she'll snag another fool like me when she's ready. Yeah, if she's attractive, she's not going to have any problem getting another guy, and she'll probably end up cheating on that guy just as well. I'm so glad I found out about this before I married her. Thank you, Lord. After going through this ordeal, I'll never get married, and my brother feels the same way. He's dealt with some shit too, and we both feel it's not worth it. And that's the end of his story. And I agree with these guys because in today's world, with women like they are, and considering today's marriage laws, I have to agree with these brothers. And overall, like I said up front, I think this guy handled the situation just about as well as you possibly could. Now, let's take a look at what I think are some of the morals of the story. First, Cheating is a predisposition and can happen at any time given the right setup. He was with this woman for 7 years before she cheated on him. Now, most people would look at that and say, well, she was a loyal person with him for 7 years. No, here was the situation. She was always a cheater. She had that deep inside of her, but she never had the opportunity. Like I've said in other videos, when they get the opportunity, a cheater will cheat. A person who doesn't have a predisposition to cheat will not cheat even if they're given the opportunity. So remember that. Next, love bombing is one of the biggest red flags. However, it is often overlooked. And women know this, guys. They know they can use their bodies and get away with a lot. And unfortunately, many of them do. Next, completely ghosting a cheater is best if you can do it. Now, the reason I say if you can do it, because in some cases, people may have children together. And in those situations, you can't completely ghost them because you have to communicate about the kids. But in all other situations where there's no kids involved, ghosting is the way to go. Next, having a trusted confidant is a huge plus. This guy had his brother. And you can see his brother gave him a lot of good advice. He was a sounding board for him. He also went with him when they staked her out. And that's invaluable. Now, a lot of people don't have that. And in those cases, you got to rely on yourself. And what you need to do in those cases is settle down. Don't do anything out of emotion or anger. Think it through. Think of all the pros and cons before you act. And finally, a cheater isn't entitled to receive closure, nor are you obligated to give it to them. Sometimes out of desperation, you'll see these cheaters and they'll say, oh, please just let me meet with you one more time to apologize and get closure. No, you don't owe that to her, so just move on. Just ghost her and go on with your life. And those are my thoughts, and now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story, and how do you think this guy handled it? Would you have done what he did, or would you have done something completely different? Tell us about it in the comments. Also, be sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel, and I will talk to you